So this is a reluctant admission by the racists in Fleet Street that even David Icke, who is condemned by Fleet Street as part of the agenda to demonize anyone who disagrees with the lying narrative peddled and paraded by the Fleet Street and the rest of the British so-called media. This is in the Daily Scar of today. It's 11:25 hours GMT. This edition is timed at actually 11:30, but we are starting at 11:25. And this is part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel, being broadcast only on the internet from London in the UK. The UK being spelled within a quote. And this is the I newspaper, which, as we have been asserting, has become a propaganda version of the lying Daily Mail. Now this one on page 21 is a piece by Ian Birrell, Birrell, Ian Birrell, or Birrell, however he pronounces it. And this one is headed as the sickening rise of the Tory chamocracy. Now it may sound like a revelation. Well, it obviously sounds as a revelation to them. That is the I newspaper. And they're still being timid. What they're saying is the persistent festering of corruption in the Boris Johnson-fronted cabal. Now, the Conservatives represent and denote and connote corruption. That is what conservatism is about. Literally, linguistically, it shouldn't be, but that's what it is. And what they're saying they're doing as a party, they are destroying what should be conserved. They're breaking up what should be conserved. So they're smashing, cutting, destroying, killing millions of trees and plants right across Little England and right across the rest of the so-called United Kingdom. And that is actually that murder of the trees and the plants and the literally millions of helpless animals of all species, that actually is taking place parallel to the politically murdered Labour Party. The Labour Party, if it is to be explained and stated and understood and exhibited by referring to the founding statements of founding aims and objects, the Labour Party should be the party for the environment. The Labour Party anywhere which talks about labor, the many, the workers, should be the party, the movement, the platform for the preservation and the protection of the environment of the planet. But it isn't. So we've got the two numerically biggest kind of parties in this country, in the UK, which are named named as relating to the universally understood positive values, but are actually engaged in carrying the agenda of the opponents of those universally positive values. So, Ian Birol, his piece appears on page 21 of the I newspaper today. It's the sickening rise of the Tory chamocracy. That's the face of the Bureau. So, and that's the face of one of the most corrupt and most incompetent and dishonest couriers of the corrupt conservative agenda and opportunism. She's Dido Harding, of course, married to John Penrose. And Penrose was briefly involved, let's say in 2016, as Theresa May's minister. Theresa May's minister at the expense of the communities. And in that role, John Penrose wrote a number of letters to the then incumbent in the corrupt post of mayor in Tower Hamlets. And I presented, I think 4 or 5 weekly, once a week programs on a now disbanded channel, on the satellite channel. And my focus was like evidence here. Focus was on the evidence of the UK central government department at the expense of housing, communities, etc., allowing the crooks in Tower Hamlets Council to be given the all clear. And the crooks in Tower Hamlets Council in, let's say, May 2016, were being given the all clear in the context of the previous kind of conservative minister, the corrupt and the racist Eric Pickles, staging a stunt of sending commissioners to Tower Hamlets Council. And the announcement by the Pickles, the lying racist Eric Pickles, had made the announcement in the House of Commons on the 4th of November 2014. Now, 2014 to 2016, let's say, just under 2 years. I'm talking about the reference to John Penrose. And Penrose and Greg Clark and some of the others that have been on the record in the context of the corruption by Lutfur Rahman, while Lutfur Rahman was imposed at the expense of the democracy and accountability and the service and the due care that he personally owed to the electors in Tower Hamlets. Now, remember, this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And I'm talking here about the crooks also known as the commissioners, that had been originally announced in context of Luther Roman's corruption. And the announcement had been made by Eric the lying racist Pickles. Now, pickles, as a word in itself, also means mess, disorganization, incompetence, lack of coherence, and all the rest of it. And Pickles, the Eric, embodied quite physically and personally, and in terms of the corrupt agenda he was following, embodied all the incompetence and mess and disorganization, lack of democracy, all the rest of it. It is funny, in an ironic sense, that a person like that, a conservative politico, as embodied in and by Eric the Pickles, Eric the Mess, was being presented and was being effectively pitted against the worst crook locally, that is Luther Roman. That was the setting. So the commissioner's announcement was given a coverage by the Fleet Street papers, including by the London Evening, No Standard, as a breath of fresh air in the context of the raging corruption identified in the person of Luther Roman in the post of the corrupt mayor at the expense of Tower Hamlets. Now, this program is being broadcast as part of the agenda that we don't make friend requests on the Facebook platform, and we don't accept friend requests. There are some on the list already, but that list actually was compiled or was allowed to build up during the period before we made it a policy not to accept friend requests and not to make friend requests. We shall discuss the reason in detail in due course as an update. Essentially, the reason we don't want any friends and we don't send any friend requests is because friends don't really exist. These are people who surf the internet and come across a program or a platform. And this is the word that the Facebook business introduced on users. Users don't actually themselves believe in people being friends. It's a kind of another word for contacts, communications. But our reason for stopping any friendship in that context is to do with the evidence. And the evidence is that the contents in the communications do not substantiate any assumption that people who make the comments, most of the people who make the comments, do the comments or make the comments after objectively, verifiably, substantially examining the evidence of what they're talking about. That's number one. Number two is that there is always a possibility statistically that among the friends would be included complete and utter poisonous elements that are there to post intentionally offensive, untruthful, misleading disturbing, distracting content. So in both those categories, I mean, if we engage in either of the categories, it would be wasting our time to begin with. And then it would cause diversion and distraction. So the Facebook generally doesn't carry friends who contribute original contents. For example, currently, and we have only currently, factually, evidentially, begun to check the evidence about certain events in Bangladesh, including the treatment of this person that we didn't know about before, who is called a film actress, a cinema actress, whose stage name appears to be Pori Moni. And we have noticed that she has been kind of treated by people who are clearly very much disrespectful towards her. And they're sexist, and they are lacking in moral, kind of ethical restraint. So they're talking about her appearance, they're talking about her list of her clients as if she is a prostitute. All of that is happening because she made an allegation to the police, a list of allegations against individuals who she has alleged were trying to rape her and murder her. Both categories, alleged categories, are substantiated in terms of the context. Bangladesh is a place or a country, it's a state, where most victims of rape, murder, and other abuse violations don't get justice, don't get remedies, don't get access to justice. So we are noticing what is going on around her, and our main access has been through the internet, Facebook posts. And we don't believe that those people who are posting the items are doing justice to the cause or the case. And they're being salacious, they are being offensive, and they're being kind of morally exposed themselves and being interested in her appearance. And we shall come to the pigmentation, the various grades of skin color among the population in the whole of the subcontinent. And in the context of the depictions in the cinema that we have begun studying only in the last few months, mainly studying the cinema India, various parts of various centers of cinema film productions in India, Mumbai, Chennai, and other places. And the scripts we have found, or we have access so far, contain express references to the Sanskrit-based word gori. Gori is white, and it is used almost exclusively in the dialogues in relation to women actors and characters. But it's not confined or limited to the actual dialogues and scripts in the recorded, distributed commercial feature films. It is actually pervasive of the whole of the cinema culture in India and in the ordinary culture in India. We shall examine those in due course. But going back to why we don't want Facebook friends is because of the artificiality and the jealousy, the spite, the insecurity that people feel, the narcissism that people feel about their own identity and positions. These are not substantial and justifiable activities. Our focus is factual, evidential, moral, ethical, universal. So therefore we have decided to broadcast the content and focus on the contents, substantial contents on the evidence, and not get diverted by decorations. And going back to Tower Hamlets and Lutfur Rahman, of course, raises the factual reason for the Daily Mail of the 16th of June running this two-page spread, Corruption and Cover-ups. Remember, until this one about Daniel Morgan and the Metropolitan Police corruption, we had no current or contemporary fact-based reference to the Metropolitan Police corruption. Historically we had, but not anything very current. So what we looked for was anything that could actually refer to the police, Metropolitan Police conduct in denying that evidence existed to prosecute Lutfur Rahman for series of crimes committed during his time as the incumbent in the post of the corrupt mayor. And we have not found any timeline or any actual identification of the crimes as alleged, as asserted by other sources, not the Metropolitan Police, but by other sources. And those sources have included even the Independent Online and the small number of councillors, including the Conservative councillor named as Peter Golds. Now, Peter Golds is himself on the record a undeniable racist liar. That is the fact we are asserting in context. But the fact that Peter Golds is an undeniable, proven, persistent racist liar does not, in our view, disentitle him of a say about and against corruption in the Tower Hamlets. Which is why, in a paradoxical way, but morally contained, consistent way, we refer to him and give him the reference and mention that he has made various interventions. And he is the only councillor in Tower Hamlets who has made as many comments against corruption by Lutfur Rahman. No other councillor has made as many comments against the corruption of Lutfur Rahman or corruption by Lutheran as Peter Goals. When I say comments, I say accessible public or publicly accessible comments. In private, there may have been others who have made or may have made comments about Lutheraman's crimes. But Peter Goals is the one who has come out in the open and made the comments among the councillors. Of course, we have been the platform and the campaign that has made the most comments about the corruption of Lutheraman, by Hrs Council, inter-Hrs Council, and so on. But we are not part of the council's bureaucracy and the council's establishment. So therefore, there are two different sources, two different levels and types of sourcing or sources. And although there have been many statements by the police or in the name of the London Metropolitan Police regarding Lutheraman's corruption and crimes, none of those, I'm reiterating in other words, none of those statements has referred to any identifiable timeline, any identifiable series of actions or activities or conduct that Lutheraman has engaged in which have been corrupt and criminal and prosecutable. So that is one serious type of cover-up that the Metropolitan Police can be accused of. And substantiated evidence of such cover-ups has now come to the public domain in the form of the 1201-page so-called report by the panel. It's not an inquiry, it's called panel, that has reported last week about the role of the various Metropolitan Police personnel in hiding, denying, covering up various corruption, in hiding and denying that police's duty to investigate what is called the axe murder that is referred to of the 37-year-old private investigator Daniel Morgan in 1987. And although it is impossible to read the contents of 1,201 page on a program like this because it will take hours, literally. The main findings, the main contents of that report, as I have understood it, doesn't really substantiate the headlines. What do I mean by that? I mean that the report is not against corruption. Corruption is being used, cover-up is being used, but the report is not dedicated to ending the corruption, and so therefore there is no examination of the police, Metropolitan Police, as a force which is actually corrupt. Institutionally corrupt is the phrase they have used, but they have not examined the evidence that can substantiate the identification of the Metropolitan Police as institutionally corrupt. And it follows that they have not examined the evidence, the parallel identity of the Metropolitan Police as the institutionally racist one. That do refer to the period when it became known as the institutionally racist Metropolitan Police in the 1990s, when there was this charade of an investigation fronted by McPherson. McPherson was the one who chaired the so-called investigation into the Metropolitan Police over the racist murder in April 1993 of the young person called Stephen Lawrence, born to Jamaican parents, Doreen and Neville Lawrence. And during the early days of the proceedings of the McPherson Committee, there was quite a lot of references to the concept of individual police personnel being racist. So the Metropolitan Police strongly objected to that. And so McPherson conceded to their objection and produced this completely corrupt phrase called institutionally racist. Now, immediately after the institutionally racist phrase is used, all responsibility, personal racist responsibility, that could be applied against individual members of the Metropolitan Police disappeared, which is what is happening with the police in terms of Daniel Morgan. So, Ian Birrell says that the Conservative Party is a chamocracy. Now, that is stupid. And the reason why I say that is stupid is because of the history of Fleet Street using idiotic words and phrases that actually diffuse the intense impact and implications of some of the outrageous wrongdoings by institutions, agencies, government departments, local councils, social services, disservices. For example, the Fleet Street has got the propensity to use a phrase called damning, called damning, or a phrase called damning report. It doesn't damn anyone, because the actual evidence of damning can only be substantiated if somebody has been sacked as a result of the findings, or somebody has actually been prosecuted as a result of the finding, or somebody has been prosecuted, tried, and found guilty, convicted, and sentenced to a very long period in prison. No such thing has happened. So here are the list of stupid, misleadingly, sensationally peddled inquiries. McPherson report, and before that, Scarman report into Brixton so-called riots. Scarman in the 1980s and McPherson in the 1990s. And in the early 2000s, it was Hutton report about the murder of David Kelly, the scientist. And then there have been countless charades about the massacre of the football fans at the Hillsborough Stadium. Now, 32 years ago, 31, more than 31 years ago, 1989. And what these reports do, I mean, Leveson inquiry didn't produce anyone going to jail, really. Rupert Murdoch did disband the news of this cruise, but nobody has been really sent to jail for lying or stealing the private data belonging to people and stolen from their mobile telephones. So if we take the big numbers or the big names of the inquiries and start from the 1970s, there was a kind of inquiry, so-called, into the media, the Fleet Street newspapers. So if we take from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the last 21 years of this century, we can find occurrences, incidents of a number of people being hired or appointed, constituting a particular inquiry. And there are two ongoing inquiries already. One is the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and the other is the child sex pedophiles, politicians and others and the councils in children's homes, children being sexually exploited, children being raped in homes, in centers that they were supposed to be safe. So think about this. This program is coming to you as a unique present, something in quality terms, in contents terms, that is not possible for any of the big multi-billionaires to deliver. That doesn't exist anything of this quality anywhere in the world, not just in the East End of London, but in the world. So what I have been talking about is actually raised by this piece by Ian Birrell, Sickening Rise of the Tory Chamocracy. And what I am trying to do is to produce evidence, uniquely produce evidence, that this thing about chamocracy, which is an intentionally diluted and understated word for corruption. This piece doesn't actually tell the truth about the corruption that is the Conservative Party. Conservative Party is not the only corrupt party in Britain, but that's what he's talking about. So let's say that's what we shall be focusing on. There is no examination of corruption, political or party political corruption in there. Now, when in the 1970s there was this local council corruption that became quite significant in being mentioned in the Fleet Street papers, two people that were named in the corruption, council-linked corruption. One was Paulson, who was probably a Lib Dem politician, and the other was a Conservative Home Secretary, Reginald Maudling. In order to get across to whoever is viewing this, the deep depth of corruption in Britain, I have to mention Dennis McShane, because McShane was at the time an employee of the BBC, and he faked. Dennis McShane faked a persona and identified himself in a call he made to a BBC program, a phone-in program. And he said that he was somebody other than himself. And he made that call in order to condemn Reginald Maudling. Now, the fact that McShane had fabricated an identity became known because he was identified not long after. And as a result of that, McShane was forced to resign from his employment at the BBC. Now, that was happening decades ago. But McShane did eventually go to jail, not for that, but for something else, decades later. So, what I'm saying here is that somebody like McShane, who felt so outraged at the corruption being reported at the time as having been perpetrated by a conservative politician, that he took the risk. And the risk became realized. He took the risk of falsifying his identity in order to tell listeners of a BBC radio program that he thought that Maudling was typical conservative sleazeball. Somebody like McShane, who had that record, first of all lost his job, and then years later got caught stealing public money or resources. The result was that he got prosecuted and imprisoned, no matter for how short a time. So McShane also wrote a book in between those two events, How to Use the Media. And McShane, despite that evident expertise on his part about the media and politics and society, failed to conceal his own corruption. So what I'm saying here is that not only was he a journalist, but he was a leading holder of a post of president of the National Union of Journalists. In what capacity I came to know him in the 70s. I came to know him, McShane, as part of my demand against racists in the Home Office that the NUJ should be active in the campaign. I had no sustained contact with McShane, but that is the context and the occasion of my contact with him. Now, here Ian Birol doesn't. Ian Birol doesn't recognize and refer to corruption, doesn't recognize and refer to any of the things that I've been mentioning. So what I'm saying is that he's not only got his heading wrong, the key word wrong, it's not chamocracy, it's corruption. But he's also hiding most of the significant milestone events illustrating corruption as dominant in every part of British state and society. What I'm saying, therefore, is that the Ian Birol piece is an exceptional piece because it's not the kind of part of the trend being followed by the I newspaper, which I have said has become a version of the Daily Mail. But despite the difference, Ian Birol fails to come across as contemporaneously engaged with the evidence of corruption in the Conservative Party. He says about Dido Harding, whose ambition to lead the National Health Service is symptomatic of a grim populism. Now, that's not true. Populism is itself a wrong word. It's an understatement. That again should be corruption. And the corruption including brazen racism. So what he's doing is, Ian Birrell is listing some of the recent corrupt behavior by the Conservatives. For example, he says, Hancock handed Dido Harding the key job of leading the test and trace program in the pandemic, saying with tragic lack of self-awareness that he could not think of anyone better than Dido. The result was a testing system that almost collapsed as last autumn's second wave took off, a tracing system that failed to trace anything like sufficient number of people, and an astonishing bill for taxpayers of £37 billion for the program's first 2 years, including hundreds of consultants from firms such as McKinsey, pocketing up to £6,624 a day. 3 months ago, the Public Accounts Committee in the House of Commons, members of Parliament that is, and chaired by a Hackney MP. 3 months ago, the Public Accounts Committee concluded, despite spending unimaginable sums, it still was not clear if test and trace was working effectively. That committee is chaired by Mag Hillier, who is a Hackney South MP. Mag Hillier, the Labour Party MP. Dido Harding, who defended rates paid to consultants equivalent to more than £1.6 million a year as very competitive, which shows the sort of world she inhabits. And she admitted last year, with the benefit of hindsight, the balance between the supply and the demand forecast wasn't right. Yet, having staggered from failure to failure, Dido Harding arrogantly thinks the entire NHS, with its £150 billion budget, should be placed in her hands. She says she will even resign from the Conservative Party if she gets the job. And to press home her case with our grimly populist government, she is spewing out its nationalist creed, with friends telling a Sunday newspaper she will end the NHS's reliance on foreign doctors and nurses. But she's not talking. Ian Birrell is still refusing to describe Dido Harding's racist criminality, calling it populist and nationalist. Certainly, it would make sense to try more medics, although it would be costly. I'm reading the paragraph again because I misread one word. Certainly, it would make sense to train more medics, although it would be costly in the short term, while many may make their expensively acquired skills abroad. But this is dog whistle politics. Again, he's refusing to call it racist, which is what it is. A display of xenophobia insulting to all those foreign-born people who have propped up the NHS since its birth and in recent months risked their lives to perform the heroics during the pandemic. It also panders to the myth of the brain drain. Studies show medical migration can transfer money, skills, and technology to developing countries. Thus, is far more effective than most of our aid policies in assisting poorer parts of the planet. Now, that assertion by Ian Birrell is ignorant, but we shall let that pass just for the time being. The job of an NHS chief is not to preach politics, but to sort out a dysfunctional system, reduce waiting times, improve management, and protect safety. The idea that the candidature of someone such as Dido Harding is even being taken seriously shows only the problems that plague our politics, our system of government, and our wider society. She is part of the sickness, not the cure. Now, that is absolutely correct. But he has not actually listed the timeline and the diagnostic relations between various parts of the sickness that pervades society. Now, back to the Daily Scar. We call it Scar, not the Star, because it's absolutely corrupt and distorts the main events it apparently claims to report. Now, although it says that Jeremy Kyle is the subject of the Channel 4 documentary, which we have been reporting on earlier on the Twitter account, which is this one on page 7, that Channel 4 is to blow up on the Kylie show or Jeremy Kyle show. And we have already posted these editorial comments. This one, Kyle. So we have done that. And yet on the front page, this stupid Scar gives the ownership of the narrative to the corrupt Jeremy Kyle itself. We say itself. We don't recognize him as a dignified person. It leads with his name. It shouldn't. Because if it is another investigative, no holds barred investigative report about the corruption and criminality and the prostitution of the platform to distress and deprave on ITV, then it should be new television probe on Jeremy Kyle. That should be the headline, not Kyle leading anything. It should be a television probe on him. That's the linguistic order, an evidential order, and of course the moral, ethical, and objectively defined journalistic order, all of which the scum Daily Scar fails. So we have talked about Ian Birrell talking about Dido Harding and getting the phrase wrong, the facts wrong, the sequence wrong. And we have exposed the Daily Scar about Jeremy Kyle. And of course, we have been talking about Piers Morgan being condemned as a narcissist by David Icke, the former BBC sports reporter, who has now become an independent critic of most things British and establishment and media, in return for which they've called him everything under the sun. And he has identified various politicians as belonging to the cult of Satan, and he has declared himself as the Son of God and all the rest of it. And there is this racist prostitute, and I'm calling her prostitute because that's what she is. She hasn't got any contribution whatsoever, morally, ethically, most certainly not journalistically, but she is the one that has been serially kind of slipping around, using her looks in the relevant years, and thus becoming a television celebrity. She's Ulrika Johnson, and she is a racist perpetrator, which I know from experience. When I did a breakfast program on ITV, when she was the weather presenter, I arrived at the studio early in the morning because that was my first visit and last visit, and I didn't get any guidance as to where to wait until my slot came up. And the person I found as I was approaching the waiting room was this. I didn't intend to find her. I wasn't looking for anyone. I was just looking for anyone if they knew where the waiting room was. And she responded abruptly, in a racistly abrupt way, that gave the encounter a complete distortion, if you like, from the purpose. I became immediately offended by Ulrika Johnson's racist refusal to give a polite response to my query as to where to wait. So Fleet Street is stuffed full of promotions for the likes of the racist prostitute Ulrika Johnson. I mean, whatever she says is not original ever. Well, of course, Ulrika Johnson was one of the women who were attracted to the money of the Swedish ex-manager of the English Football Association. The other one was allegedly a Bangladesh-born woman called Fariha Alam, who apparently has now settled down in Canada somewhere. Now, if anyone watching this program would know that one of the things we assert about Little England, and Little England are racists and idiots, is that Little Englanders don't believe that there is a world outside Little England. They think that Little England is bigger than the rest of the world. Yes, we say that. And the reason we say that is because of the mentality evident in the contents of this criminal. Now, this is one of the, let's say, 10 currently known male Scottish-born suckers of the Little English kind of establishment. He is Trevor the Terrible Kavanagh, and there is this Michael Gove, there is this Andrew Brilopad Neil, there is Andrew Marr, and a few others. Now, this idiot is absolutely brazenly claiming that Boris Johnson party won, rest of the world nil. That's how he is inflating Boris Johnson's ego. It's not something I'm making up. It's Trevor the criminal Kavanagh saying that. And the scum has got 4 topics in the so-called editorial. One is the attack against Meghan Markle and Harry. The second one is the lie that the Tories are about to raise taxes. And the third one is an attack on John Bercow. And the fourth one is a promotion for Boris Johnson and Boris Johnson's COVID disaster. Now, about the piece on John Bercow, we have to say on the record for the evidence, for balance, for proportion, and for context, that since we began evidentially, factually observing his antics when he was a member of the fascist conservative student outfit, we have never endorsed anything John Bercow has done or said, but we have noted some of the different things that he has engaged in, especially during the later part of his tenure as the Speaker of the House of Commons. So we are not his fans. We are not only not his fans, but we are also not avoiding his past, which you condemn. His past as a racist, past as an inciter to hatred and a fascist. I mean, so much so that we have consistently mentioned the fact that Bercow, because of Bercow and his antics, even the right-wing racist who was the chair of the Conservative Party at the time, Norman Tebbit, shut down the Conservative Party front organization that Bercow was using as a platform. Now, the Times today, quite apart from the Murdoch-owned scum, the Times too is having a go in an editorial against the same Bercow. So what we say that is connected with is the fact that there is a by-election, imminent by-election in the seat previously held until her murder by racists, by Joe Cox. And what the Conservatives are trying to do, which they are in a wider democracy, they have all entitlements to try to do, is to defeat the Labour Party at the election, by any means. And the biggest means appear to be the two. One is the fact that Muslims are reportedly very unhappy with the Labour Party's hostility to Muslims and the Labour Party's refusal or denial of recognition to the rights of the Palestinians. So that has been being put on the front or at the front by those who are working to make sure the Labour Party candidate loses the by-election and gives the Conservatives the present. Opinion pollsters are reporting that the Labour Party is set to lose the constituency seat it has held in the past. So one is the Muslim kind of factor that is being hyped up, artificially raised to secure the defeat of the Labour Party, because there is a significant proportion of Muslim voters in the constituency. And the majority of those Muslim voters come, not all of them, not every single one of them, but the majority of them come from a Pakistani background. So that's number one. And number two is John Barker. Barker has been condemned by the Fleet Street papers following the Mail on Sunday disclosure against him that Barker is plotting to become or has defected to the Labour Party. And today's Times newspaper condemning Barker defecting to the Labour Party is not based on objective assessment of the impact or the implication or the relevance of Barker's condemning Boris Johnson as Barker joins the Labour Party. They are trying to undermine him and diminish him and dilute the impact of his condemnation of Boris Johnson so that the voters at Batley and Spen, Joe Cox's previous original constituency, is to make sure that the by-election goes the Tories' way. There is no other issue as important or as being treated as being important by the Fleet Street papers as those two. So concerned are the Conservatives to defend Boris Johnson as the leader. The Conservatives in Fleet Street, I mean, that they are praising Johnson in terms, as Trevor Kavanagh has done, that Johnson has one goal while the rest of the world has no point at all. So they want to stop the Labour Party being brought to anything nearly to life, even temporarily. Because if the Labour Party don't lose if the Labour Party is to lose the Batley and Spen election, according to the Bethnal Green born mental slave to the racists, the black-skinned Stephen Bush, who is being given increasing spots by the Times. Batley Span is a constituency that was solidly conservative throughout the government of Margaret Thatcher and John Major, but one that ought to be moving towards Labour. Yet its voters have picked up on the fact that Labour seems to be ashamed of them and are flirting with other parties of the left. The problem with talking like a loser is that in politics it is a way of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, the candidate the Labour Party has chosen for Batley Span is, of course, the sister of Jo Cox. And we shall come back to that again. Of course, the Times newspaper is the cartoonist. It's not Peter Brooks, the normal one, or the usual one, let's say. It's somebody else, and it's the cartoon showing John Barker kicking Boris Johnson when he's down. And the main caption is, kicking a man when he's down. So what does the Times editorially say against John Barker? And the Times actually is praising Lindsay Hoyle. Lindsay Hoyle is the current Speaker in the House of Commons. And Hoyle got elected as MP, as a Labour Party MP. So he's a non-conservative in that sense. But the Times is writing against John Barker but he's praising his successor, Lindsay Hoyle, because Lindsay Hoyle is not overtly critical of the behavior of the Conservative Party, and most certainly not the behavior of the incumbent in the post of Conservative leader of the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And the language in which the Times editorial is written is a personal language. It's not a language of an objective observer parliamentary language. It is accusing John Barker of being someone who used pompous approach and language, as he, Barker, was in post as the Speaker of the House of Commons. The Times is being dishonest because Lindsay Hoyle, even before he became incumbent in the post of Speaker full-time, Lindsay Hoyle was one of Barker's deputies for a long time as Speaker. And Hoyle always showed his servitude to the conservatives. Even when he was deputizing for Barco, Hoyle was very careful to come across as more critical of those who criticized the conservatives than he was of the conservatives who deserved the criticism but were being shielded from those criticism by the deputies, including Lindsay Hoyle. Remember what we are doing here? We are carrying out and conducting a world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. We are not just reading the headlines and making pathetic, tokenistic, tickling comments, as happens with the guests that appear regularly on the mainstream BBC, Sky News, Channel 4, ITV, slots that are supposed to be about reviewing the papers, mainly Fleet Street. They don't discuss these issues. They don't have this narrative. They don't have any moral commitment to expose the corruption and criminality that goes on via the Fleet Street titles. So, their first editorial in the Times today is headed "The Butcher of Tehran." And its subheading says, "The election of Iran's new hardline president was neither free nor fair, but he is now under pressure to agree to a nuclear deal to ease sanctions crippling his country." Now that editorial reflects the response published by the so-called coalition regime in Israel. These are all new events because the president only got in yesterday, de facto. And the news in France, the news headline or headline news, of course, includes the trial of Bavarie Bacot, however the French pronounce it. It's a woman who says she pulled the trigger on her husband in self-defense. She has got 550,000 people who have signed a petition asking the French authorities to drop the charges against her. And something else very different is happening on the same page of the Times. We just got a picture captioned two meteorologists from Kansas in the USA drove for 6 hours to Colorado to find a tornado, at which point Tom Bidard, 29, asked Ray Madde, 26, to marry him. That's the picture. Very odd and very not usual. We shall talk more about the item that is in the Times newspaper today, which is headed, "Landlords See Red Over Disgraceful Extension to Evictions Ban." We shall come to that in more detail in due course. So what the Times is saying on pages 40 and 41 is misleading headline, because this one is actually talking about evictions ban against businesses, not against ordinary tenants. So the headline is completely misleading and wrong and untruthful. It's not protecting the ordinary tenants, residential tenants. She'll come to that. And what the Times is reporting as normal is that Israel is preparing to strike on Iran after election of Butcher. The Butcher of Tehran is what the Times is calling the newly elected president of Iran. So it's the Times may be published from London, but it's actually carrying the position statement of Tel Aviv. So what we shall be doing is going back to the issues covered by the Fleet Street papers in relation to the media and the role of the media in Fleet Street as compared to the media in China, where the Chinese controlled region has got a newspaper that is supposed to be critical of Chinese regime, and we should take a longer look there. Now this is very strange. This murderer, husband of the young woman Caroline Crouch, it's really outrageous and upsetting. And they've got another piece about Matthew Hancock saying that he withheld data about the virus before a crunch meeting about the policy. And there is continuing promotion of Andy Barnum against Nicola Sturgeon. Now, Barnum is the mayor of the Manchester region, the Labour Party mayor. And it is quite possible that this promotion for him is being engineered by Barnum himself as part of his bid to come across as the suitable leader to take over at the helm in the name of the politically murdered Labour Party when Keir Starmer is eventually ousted. And there are any number of obscene photographs of celebrities hugging their daughters on the so-called Father's Day. And there is this Andrew Pierce, who is gloating as he promotes Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker in the House of Commons, and as he gloats promoting the loss of the Labour Party in Amersham, loss of the by-election held at the Berkshire constituency, Chesham and Amersham. And they're promoting Rishi Sunak as the restraining other side of the Conservative government. They're painting Sunak as the one who is trying to stop See, the Times is painting Diana's murder as a kind of suicide by her to avoid the Conservatives' fury at her campaign to end mines. And the Times and the Daily Mirror is lying and he's stupid. And they've got a piece about Barco saying that he was never, ever offered to defect to Labour Party in return for getting made a member of the House of Peers. Now, this is something that is likely to continue. And the financial crimes is continuing the same theme against Iran's new president. What's his name? Ibrahim Raisi. And Ibrahim Raisi is being called the butcher of Tehran. And his election is being described as evidence that Iran needs to be bombed by Israel. There is a piece in the Financial Times, Financial Crimes on the front page. In addition to that one, the second main heading on the front page of the Financial Times, Financial Crimes as we call it, about HS2 now. HS2 is one of the things that we campaign against. And it is one of the main projects that we have been campaigning for years against. Now, the item in the Financial Crimes on the front page is really typical of the corrupt editorial tactic by the Financial Crimes. Reading the heading again, bill for HS2 jumps another 1.7 billion pounds as COVID adds to rail projects delays. Now that heading is in denial because it doesn't refer to the fact that HS2 to begin with essentially is the wrong project. It doesn't say that. It blames COVID as the reason for the project's delays. So HS2 is being promoted by the lyingly edited Financial Crimes. So there are two main pieces on the banner on page 1 of the Financial Times. They're both related to China and Chinese impact. So there is a picture on the page 3 of the Financial Crimes with a woman standing with a banner. 128,000 COVID deaths, UK. And the Financial Crimes has got another propaganda piece that is written in denial of the actual presence of the Indian variant, which the Western countries have now began to deny. That denial is evident in the fact that they call it the Delta variant, not the Indian variant. And it says on page 6 of the Financial Crimes, China watchdogs sink their teeth into big tech. And on diplomacy, it says Saudi Arabia to revive oil aid for Pakistan. That's a very telling heading. What does this one refer to? Now, there are two women, one from Islamabad and the other from New Delhi, has contributed to this, and there are two others. Anjali Raval in London and Simeon Carr in Dubai. There are four women have contributed to this art in this piece on the diplomacy on page 6 of the Financial Crimes. And it says Riyadh's 1.5 billion a year deal draws on thawed relations to counter Iran's influence. And it's a diplomatic part of the move to isolate Iran. Now, Edward Mortimer, who has got an obituary about him, and the obituary is headed Promoter of Tolerance with a passion for human rights. And he's briefly described as journalist, author, academic, UN speechwriter, 1943 to 2021. So he was speechwriting for how many United Nations Secretary Generals? So this is 78 years, for 78 years, according to that claim. So they're saying Edward Mortimer, who has died aged 77, well, he wasn't speechwriter from 1943 to 2021, obviously. It's the year he was born, 43. Was chief foreign affairs commentator of the Financial Times between 1987 and 1998, chief speechwriter for Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General, between 1998 and 2006, and a distinguished fellow of All Souls College, Oxford. As a journalist, author, and academic, an international civil servant, Mortimer managed to combine an extraordinary variety of careers with a consistent theme that linked them all. He had a passion for the defense of human rights and the protection of minorities, the resolution of conflicts, and the promotion of greater understanding between the countries and communities. And his father, Robert, was Bishop of Exeter, and he grew up in a highly intellectual family. He could easily have become a full-time academic, having been a top history scholar at Balliol College, Oxford, winning a congratulatory first-class degree, followed by the prize fellowship at All Souls. And so on. Now, Edward Mortimer is a name that I have come across, of course, but I have not noticed Edward Mortimer as significant, let alone consistent, name advocating human rights. That is the evidence that I recall. Now let's see what the Financial Crimes is saying about India. This is the Delta variant. They are calling the India variant the Delta variant. So they're admitting it. So why have the liars changed the name from India to Delta? Because it accounts for 96% of genomic sequenced COVID-19 infections in Portugal, more than 20% in Italy, and about 16% in Belgium. The Financial Times' calculations show the small but rising number of cases has raised concerns that the Delta variant could halt the progress the European Union has made over the past 2 months in bringing new infections and deaths to the lowest level since at least the autumn. Okay, so reading this first paragraph again, the Delta coronavirus variant that swept the United Kingdom has become dominant in Portugal and appeared in clusters across Germany, France, and Spain, prompting European health officials to warn further action is needed to slow its spread. The second paragraph is, while the new strain which emerged in India still only accounts for a fraction of the total coronavirus cases in mainland Europe, it is gaining ground. It accounts for 96% of the genomic sequenced COVID-19 infections in Portugal. The small but rising number of cases has raised concerns about the Delta variant could halt the progress of the European Union has made over past 2 months in bringing new infections and deaths to their lowest level since at least the autumn. As I said, the financial crimes is continuing the criminal distortion of the news by colluding with the suppression of the identity of the virus as being linked to India, originating from India. And Andrew Pierce is actually congratulating the lying Lib Dumps for supporting HS2. Okay, so this piece about Diana dying to avoid the conservatives. Let's see what they're saying. So they're starting the 5-page special report, which the headline Countdown to Catastrophe. Next month, she would have turned 60. Now, for a landmark series and podcast that re-examines Diana's last days, the Daily Mail has spoken to a host of crucial eyewitnesses. On Saturday, we revealed the moment Prince Charles was quizzed by a former head of Scotland Yard over fantastical claims of a plot to kill her, while the doctor who battled to save her life shared his story. Today we turn back the clocks to our final summer and a countdown to tragedy. And they have a 4-part kind of summary there. When you say that real reason she was in Paris, truth about her feelings for Dodi Fayed, Daily Mail journalist she made last call to, and it's all been laid bare in landmark series, which is this one they're promoting. So there is the 5 pages of the special report they claim, and it's a countdown to catastrophe. Now, let's say that we don't accept the role played by the Daily Mail, either in the last decades or in this special report, because the agenda they are promoting is to steer away from the people that murdered her. And there is no hiding the fact that the Daily Mail is edited on the assumption that someone like Prince Charles, the son of the monarch and former husband of Diana, the Daily Mail believes that Charles should not have been interviewed after Diana was killed. That is something that the Daily Mail is running on currently and has run currently. And they're also running the theme that they have followed right from the beginning, that the relationship with Al-Fayad's son, Dodi, was bogus, that it was made up. It was something that was confected. It did exist, but it wasn't her spontaneous kind of relationship. In other words, she was duped into it, she was maneuvered into it, she was manipulated into that relationship. So the Daily Mail is lying, because if her relationship with Dodi Fayad was artificially created, then so many other things about her life and contacts and communications were artificially created. But none of the white people around her, that is on the list so far of her acquaintances and contacts, is treated with as much anything comparable to the denial, the prejudice that they have shown towards Al-Fayad's son. So we shall talk more about this 5-page special later. So going back to the Financial Times hiding the identity of India as the origin for that particular variant. This piece, Delta variant threatens European Union's pandemic progress. This piece only refers to India in an incoherent, illogical, irrational, corrupt, and dishonest way. Because the first reference in this piece to India is in the indirect way in the second paragraph. While the new strain, while it is a kind of downplaying sentence, while the new strain which emerged in India, they don't say it was caused in India. And then they refer to India in similarly indirect way. For example, in the caption to a picture in Hounslow, in West London. They give the secret agenda away. There's a local difficulty. A cluster of Delta variant cases caused concern in the London borough of Hounslow. And there is a picture of COVID-19 variant of concern that they show in the piece referring to Hounslow. Now, Hounslow is one of the West London areas with significant population coming from India or of Indian origin. So what we are saying here in diagnosing the financial crimes lying, hiding of the source as India is that political intervention has been active in the policy making in the Boris Johnson government. The Boris Johnson government is doing political interference to hide the Indian connection so that Johnson's Brexiteering policy of taking over the world and having high volume of business agreements with India can go ahead and, to use his phrase, can be, quote, done while exposing the majority of the people affected in India by the policy that caused the surge in the variant, in the virus in India, the policy of Narendra Modi. That is hidden. That can be hidden. That's what they're doing. And on this end, Boris Johnson had to be almost physically prevented in April from going to India to meet Narendra Modi. And that was happening when the surge was being increased in India against Indian people by the policies that Narendra Modi was adopting in India. And so we shall be stopping this edition, which is just, I think, just over 2 hours long. We shall stopping it here at 13:33 hours GMT or 13:34 hours GMT on Monday, the 21st of June 2021.